This attack has his infantry file in down beyond the McLean House on what we call back lane into Tibbs Lane and off towards the Tibbs House, which stood beyond the woods here to the right. And then Fitzlee had his cavalry further to the northwest. Gordon has 4 divisions of infantry, and they are commanded by these fellows. Brian Grimes on the right, Clement Evans on the left, and James Walker on the right, and William Wallace. He doesn't look nothing like Mel Gibson though, does he? Or Mel Gibson doesn't look like him. Or do I have the wrong William Wallace? I guess I have the wrong William Wallace. So they come up here about 2 o'clock in the morning and get into position. The Federal cavalry is hunkered down beyond the ridge up ahead, and that cavalry that comes up and relieves the pickets is under a fellow named Charles Smith, formerly of the 1st Maine Cavalry. Trying to find my picture of Smith to show you. There he is. There's Smith. He has 4 regiments of cavalry. And these regiments had done pretty good service throughout the Appomattox campaign. In fact, his brigade is responsible for starting the battles of Sailor's Creek when he hits the Confederates at a place called Holt's Crossroads, forcing them to stop, making a gap in their line, which will eventually end with the capture of nearly 8,000 Confederates. He has the 1st Maine Cavalry. He has the 6th and 13th Ohio Cavalry. He has the 2nd New York Mounted Rifles. Now, most of those guys are carrying Sharp's carbines, but the 1st Maine is carrying 16-shot Henrys and 7-shot Spencers. So they got a good bit of firepower up there. Initially, there's a little, the shooting starts as soon as the sun's up, close to 6 a.m. There's a little confrontation between Fitzlee and John Gordon on who will lead the assault. Will it be the cavalry or will it be the infantry? If it's cavalry, Gordon wants Fitzlee to make the assault. If it's infantry, Fitzlee wants Gordon to make the assault. Well, Brian Grimes gets a little perturbed and says, it's our duty to attack, and basically Brian Grimes leads off the assault.
Infantry?
Grimes has the infantry, yes. James Lord, he's a West Point graduate. He has 2 3-inch ordnance pieces to support Smith's brigade. And the Confederate cavalry under General Roberts, William P. Roberts, says they charged out and captured Lord's guns. William P. Roberts is 23 years old. He is the youngest general in the Confederate Army. May bring it up later. I'm not so sure they captured Lord's guns, but possibly another battery. As the Confederates come up on Smith's brigade just prior to 8 o'clock that morning, and Smith has to readjust his line because originally it's facing down the stage road, but most of the attack is not coming east to west, it is coming north to south. So Smith has to redeploy his brigade to face to the north. And if you come on my tour tomorrow when we go on the Coleman House Trail, we'll get to go walk through Smith's position. That trail was just opened last week, and we have waysides out there, and we're going to actually go out to where the heaviest fighting took place. So you'll get to see a lot of these places that I'm discussing this morning. When Lord is up there, he's dropping shells into the Confederate line. One of the shells kills a Confederate cavalryman named John Ashby. He, one of his comrades, he's buried up in the cemetery there. One of his comrades said that the shell never struck him, but just passed close by. But the impact apparently was enough to kill John Ashby. Let's move on them very fast. And even though the 1st Maine has their Spencers and Henrys, they're not able to keep the Confederates back. They are really fighting a delaying action. Frank Gates of the 1st Maine Cavalry said this: "We were on foot and the enemy drove us for nearly a mile. My chum, C.W. Geary, was wounded on the retreat and I tried to help him off the field a short distance, but I had to drop him and run. The enemy was so close. I was struck in the right leg by a spent ball, and at the same time it hurt me a great deal. I seized the tail of the provost marshal's horse, and he pulled me along until we got within our lines." That's a man desperate to escape. Agreed to sacrifice themselves so General Gordon's men can retreat. Fortunately for them, they don't all get killed. They get surrounded and captured. But this marker was put up here in 1905. It's the only troop markers we have on the battlefield. North Carolina claimed, they did a book called 5 Points in the Record of North Carolina. And they made the claims of being first at Big Bethel. They fought in the first battle prior to Bull Run. They went farthest at Gettysburg, farthest at Chickamauga. Well, there's 2 left, right? So here at Appomattox, they claim to have captured the last guns and fired the last volley. So up by the cannon there is their marker for the last capture of guns, and the last volley is across the road. So McLean House area is the epicenter of the battlefield. I'm going to cover it here for you today. If you want to go out there to the site with me tomorrow, I'll go over where these actual events take place. If you are not going to be here tomorrow and want to walk the trail today, you're more than welcome to. A wayside is an interpretive sign.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Dumb question.
Not a dumb question.
Not if you don't know
A lot of people do not know that. I had a person yesterday saying, "What do they call those things?" They're called waysides. Yep.
We call them signs.
Yep, they're signs. So, also in support of Smith's Brigade is Randall McKenzie and General Young. So the question is, where was Grant during this campaign, and how does he communicate, and how does he know what's going on? Well, he is moving along with the armies, but he goes in various directions. He ends up at a place called Jetersville, Burkeville. He's on the southern wing of the movement initially, but he goes into Farmville after the battles of Sailor's Creek. He makes headquarters at the Randolph House Hotel. That's where he opens communication with Lee. After that, he crosses the river, and the next day he has sets up his headquarters at Clifton House, and he again communicates with General Lee there. That night, he receives a response from General Lee while at Clifton House, and he's got a terrible headache. Meade's outside in a tent. So neither one of them are doing great, and his letter had given terms of surrender to General Lee, and the letter that comes back says Lee says, I don't really want to surrender, but I would be interested in discussing peace with you. Well, he just flip-flopped the whole surrender talk for the last 2 days by saying he wants to discuss peace. But James, that has 2 cores in it. One corps is white troops, the 24th Corps. One corps is black troops, United States colored troops. But the thing is, his army had been up besieging Richmond, and half of it goes into Richmond. The other half is brought south to help take Petersburg. And so he only has 2 divisions of the 24th Corps under this guy of Gettysburg fame, John Gibbon, whose troops repulsed Pickett's charge April 3rd, 1863. And he was wounded at Gettysburg, but he is back now commanding the Army of the James. Then he has 2 brigades of United States colored troops marching along with him. And this is Sergeant Peck of the 8th USCT. And these men had marched over 30 miles on April 8th. A few more miles on April 9th. Incredible feat of marching. Ord is riding.
Where'd they coming in from?
They're coming in from Farmville and Prince Edward Courthouse.
What direction?
They're coming in this way.
Okay.
Basically along Route 460.
They're traveling east, but they're south of us here.
Yes.
Traveling east.
Confederates, basically they're going to hit the Confederate right flank, because what Gordon's troops have done is a left wheel and pushed the Federal cavalry off this ridge and opened the Richmond-Lynchburg stage road. They had done what they set out to do, because that by them pushing to the south, this road is going to be open for the rest of the army to move unimpeded. So the wagons, Mahone, E.P. Alexander's artillery, Longstreet, they are going to come through this area, that's the plan, and continue on towards Rustburg. So Gordon's men have succeeded in doing what they wanted to do. That Federal infantry arrives on the scene and pitches into the right flank of Gordon's men and starts to push them back down the Richmond-Lynchburg stage road. When the infantry arrives of the 24th Corps and the 25th Corps, that apparently was the signal that from the meeting the night before at General Lee's headquarters, if Federal infantry arrives, that would signal time to surrender. And so when that Federal infantry arrives, the Confederates start falling back. Fitzhugh Lee apparently had the blessing from Uncle Robert that he could escape with the cavalry, if he could, and go join Joe Johnston in North Carolina. Of course, cavalrymen own their own horses. Nobody knew Grant was going to be kind and let them keep their horses. So, you know, it's if something happened to you, they take your car away. Oh, you probably don't want that, do you? Right? So Fitzhugh Lee is going to escape with his cavalry. And once that infantry appears, he starts to proceed with that plan and withdraw his cavalry. Here's a picture of Fitzhugh Lee and a staff officer of his that he was very fond of, named Charles Minnigerode. Charles Minnigerode joined the Confederate Army at age 16. His parents were not happy. He did not do it with their blessing. His father is rather famous. Anybody know who his father was? He's the Reverend Pastor, whatever you want to call him, at St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Richmond.
Whoa.
Yeah, I hear a whoa.
Whoa.
Because what is St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Richmond?
That's where Jefferson Davis was.
That's
when
right.
We heard that about the breakthrough.
That's where Jefferson Davis went to church. It's where Robert E. Lee went to church when he was in Richmond. It's where all the blue bloods of Richmond society went to church. So it is the most prominent church in Richmond, if not the South. And there's a wayside out there on the road from the 39th Illinois, 62nd, 67th Ohio, 85th Pennsylvania, 199th Pennsylvania. And they start taking artillery fire from guns of Colonel Pogue's battalion that is along Trent's Lane. And they get hit pretty hard, and they need support, and they send troops from Colonel Dandy's brigade, the 11th Maine. And the 11th Maine arrives on the flank of Osborne's brigade. And I'd love to find a photo of him, but I'm not sure where he ended up. I'd have to research that further. I did actually look and find maybe no picture of something, but I don't remember off the top of my head where he went. There's Charles Griffin with the 5th Corps. You got the 24th and 25th Corps coming down the road here. The 5th Corps comes over to the south. All the trees you see are not there, and they can see that Federal infantry coming over the ridge. Also behind that Federal infantry is the Federal cavalry under General Custer, followed by Tom Devon. General Gordon is over here. He sees perhaps 15,000 troops appear off in that direction. He sends a note to General Lee saying, "I have fought my corps to a frazzle. I cannot go forward, and unless these forces are prevented from coming upon my rear," and that's why I say you got to be here. What is he talking about? He's talking about the Federal 5th Corps and the cavalry up on that ridge. He says, "I cannot long go forward." But Lee has no troops to send him. Longstreet is 4 miles away, and he is going to be attacked by the Federal 2nd Corps. Although there is a truce out there because Lee has gone through the lines hoping to meet with Grant in that direction. As the Federal 5th Corps comes down from the far ridge down to the creek, there are Federal skirmishers out there, and some of them are commanded by this fella here. You recognize this guy? General Joshua Chamberlain. But he no longer commands the 20th Maine. He has the 185th New York and 198th Pennsylvania. And they are skirmishing and pushing towards the village at an angle. So up here in this vicinity, the 24th Corps and 5th Corps intersect, and they start pushing the Confederates towards the village. And that's when Jenkins takes those 25 men, and there's a photo of Jenkins to hold the Federals back.
Can I see it?
Yep.
No.
There he is.
So were these trees here, any of this stuff here?
There was a wood line in this direction, but behind the wood line, it was largely clear out towards Grant's headquarters. Today it's all wooded, but it was a large clearing back there. The Confederate Army falls back into the Appomattox River Valley. E.P. Alexander is now on the scene with his artillery. General Mahone's division is over there. They form a last line of defense. If the Army of Northern Virginia is going to fight to the death, it is going to be on that line back in the Appomattox River Valley. Federal cavalry moving along that ridgeline under George Custer is pressing the Confederate left flank. Confederate artillery, Talcott's engineers, and eventually a brigade of Alabamians under General Forney are sent over there to stop Custer, and they send out a white flag to stop the fighting. Alfred Wadd made a sketch of it. This is Robert Sims, who carries the initial truce flag. You can see part of that in our museum upstairs. It's the first flag. There are somewhere 10, 12 truce flags that get sent out because the Confederate battle line extends about 1.5 miles.
What time of the day was that?
This is 10 o'clock in the morning.
One of the regiments that will follow, the 41st, in 2 days covered nearly 60 miles. Yeah. During the last 24 hours leading up to this battle, Grant had split his forces. He's got Federal cavalry coming up in front of Lee to get here to Appomattox Station to capture the supply trains the evening of April 8th. That's what Lee was trying to do, was follow the old Richmond-Lynchburg Road through this area to get to the supply trains to try to head south. That is denied to him because the Federal cavalry have his supplies, and now they've blocked this road. So here's the point. If enough Federal infantry can get to this place on the morning of April 9th, they will have Lee cut off. They could have him surrounded. They're going to make a forced march. The entire 2nd Division of the 25th Corps, the entire 24th Corps of white soldiers, the 5th Corps of the Army of the Potomac, they are going to swing around here to the south and ultimately come up here in front of Lee. They are going to be marching 30 to 35 miles, depending on where they started, in about 20 hours. They're going to be tired. They're going to be exhausted. But their morale is sky high because they know what they could accomplish through this march. Some of the generals and officers wrote about it. General Edward Ord, who commanded the Army of the James, is encouraging his soldiers to make this march. These are his words. Legs will win this battle, men. I promise you, boys, this will be the last day's march you will ever have to endure. One good, steady march, and the campaign is ended. So it turns out he was exactly correct. So we'll see. Lieutenant Colonel James Gibbon of the 127th U.S. Colored Infantry said this: the men, though short of rations and almost always worn out with fatigue, moved on without a murmur, as long as there was an enemy to follow. And a surgeon, C.P. Heikold from the 25th Corps, said, in an experience of more than 3 years, I never witnessed greater powers of endurance. There was no straggling, and the men were constantly in the best of spirits. They know what they can accomplish through this march. Now, that morning of April 9th, things were not going so well for the Federals here at Appomattox Court House. The ridge line just west of the village, look up from the McLean House at where the Confederate cemetery is, just west of the village, that was a Federal cavalry roadblock, blocking this road, denying Lee access to get out of here. 9,000 Confederates hit those Federal cavalry and push them back, drive them back down this road. The battle is up and down this road for a mile. Mostly a cavalry action that morning. Lee is getting his troops pushing through the area, trying to open this escape route. Those Federal cavalry are being driven back, and they have one hope, and that is that this infantry can arrive after this forced march around. One of those Federal cavalrymen from the 2nd Ohio was Captain Luman Tenney. He said this: the morning of the 9th came. The cavalry was being pushed back rapidly toward the station, meaning toward the railroad. The boys were falling, scores of them. Why was it with victory so near? When over the hill, a dark column was espied coming down the road in close column at quick time. What a relief from the awful suspense. What cared we for the color or race of those men who brought relief to us? We saw courage and determination in their coal black faces. And another Federal cavalryman says this before we move on to the next stop. Keep up your courage, boys. The infantry is coming right along in 2 columns, black and white, side by side. A regular checkerboard was his interpretation of what he's seeing. So those soldiers are marching into battle, some of them for the first time. We're going to follow in their footsteps here in just a moment. You go around the tree line here, you won't be able to see much of the battlefield. Neither about 8:30, 9 o'clock, what had been a Confederate victory from the looks of all things had started turning. The Army of the James had begun arriving on the field after that forced march all the way around, including these USCT. As the white troops, 24th Corps, primarily took post on the other side of the Richmond-Lynchburg Road around the Coleman Farm, advancing toward the Confederates. And the Confederate line, by the way, for reference, is the ridge line across the field in front of you. Those trees. That is where the North Carolina Monument is today, for good reason, as we'll see, marking some of the last fighting positions. That's a little bit in the future. So Confederate artillery is just past the modern cemetery you see in the distance, firing down the Richmond-Lynchburg Road, primarily at the white soldiers of the 24th Corps, around the Coleman Farm. 41st USCT is going to arrive in this vicinity, and they're going to deploy 2 companies of skirmishers. Now, skirmishers during the Civil War are soldiers that are not lined up elbow to elbow in a battle line like you see in the films. They're actually spread out 5 paces, theoretically, between each soldier, and they can use cover. They can lay down, they can kneel, they can use whatever cover they can find, trees, fences, and their job is to feel the enemy position, find out how strong it is, what are we walking into, essentially. These skirmishers are going to advance across these fields ahead of you that we'll be walking through, and their opposition are Confederate skirmishers sent out from the main line, doing the same thing. Now, these men of the 41st USCT, these 2 skirmish companies, about 150 men, spread out for quite a distance, 5 paces between each man. That's what you would have seen right here. They advance through the woods, they come out into this field, they're engaged the whole way, The Confederates that they're fighting against have a major advantage. They are much more veteran soldiers than these 41st USCT troops. The 2nd Corps of the Army of Northern Virginia, John B. Gordon's men, had made this attack. North Carolina soldiers deployed on that ridge are going to send out these skirmishers, and most of the Confederate skirmishers are from elite sharpshooter battalions. These are the best of the Army of Northern Virginia. They're the most physically fit, best marksmen from every infantry brigade. They've done this for a while. Those are the men, these men of the 41st are coming up against. They're going to have this running fight essentially all the way through these fields. They get just past where the bridge is. There's a small creek that runs through the field. You can kind of see it there. Just past that, a little bit to the right, they're going to halt because coming up from the south is the 5th Corps of the Army of the Potomac with their own skirmishers deployed. The Confederates are going to start falling back. So this brief skirmish between these two forces that we're going to walk through is short, but it's partly why this battle proved so decisive. There's a couple accounts of it. Colonel Llewellyn Haskell, the 41st USCT, said this: "We had not marched far before the cavalry were driven in, and the regiment advanced in line through the strip of wood the cavalry had left, then lay down and sent a company to the front as skirmishers. They advanced, driving the enemy from the fields in our front. They behaved very handsomely." A soldier in the 8th USCT deployed just to the left here of the 41st. They're sending out skirmishers as well. The soldier said this: "Early we advanced, and our skirmish lines met those of the enemy. We expected a fight. I never felt more like it. A few bullets whistling around, a few shells passed over. We rush in, a hurrying deployment of 2 companies of skirmishers. The Rebs gave way, and all was quiet." It's a short engagement, but there are casualties on both sides. And amongst the 41st USCT, 2 men are wounded. Thomas Crawford, Company C, 40-year-old free man from Kentucky. He was a barber and enlisted as a substitute in Pennsylvania with the 41st USCT in August of 1864. Hadn't seen much action. He's wounded here, shot in the right eye. Loses his eye but survives. He's mustered out of the hospital in June of 1865. William Johnson of the 8th USCT, another man from Kentucky, 26 years old, another substitute, joined up in Indiana, late 1864. He's wounded, he survives as well. The one fatality here from the USCT is going to be a white officer, captain of Company A, 41st USCT, John W. Falconer. He's a 24-year-old college student from Hamilton, Ohio. An abolitionist, most likely, joined the Army, seemed to be really gung-ho. There are accounts that during the skirmish line, he's mounted on his horse. That would not be ideal in this situation. Officers were normally down on foot with their men on the skirmish line. He may have been mounted. He's wounded in the left side, survives for nearly 2 weeks. He dies in the field hospital in Farmville on April 23rd, knowing what his sacrifice had helped achieve. This battle is not going to be a bloodbath. It didn't have to be. It's going to prove decisive. The worst of the fight is going to be on the other side of the road around the Coleman farm. We'll talk a little bit about that as we go. But as more and more of the USCT and the white soldiers of the 25th Corps come online, what had been a skirmish develops into a solid wall of blue occupying these fields and advancing west. The Confederates up on that ridge begin realizing what they're up against. Word gets to Lee of what they're up against. And that's when the decision is made that this is a no-go. There is no way forward. Everyone fall back. And there's more to it than that, as we'll see. To give you an idea of what the USCT started doing in the aftermath of this brief skirmish, Colonel Llewellyn Haskell of the 41st again said this: "At 9:30, we moved to the left and formed part of the second line of General Foster's division and followed the movements of his line. They're now going to be held in reserve for the rest of the fight." There are 2 brigades of USCT on the field, by the way. I've not mentioned their commanders. General Doubleday, his troops are now in reserve, including the 41st. But Colonel William Woodward and his brigade, arriving on the field a little bit later, they're going to see a little bit more of this battle before it's done. They're going to be sent all the way around to the extreme left of the advancing Federal line. Woodward said this: My command was ordered on the left of General Foster's division. The double quick was ordered, beating moved pretty quickly. The troops advancing splendidly. Deployed and advanced in line. The line advanced in splendid order, driving the enemy's line of skirmishers back to their main line. The whole line receded to a dense wood in their rear, which was soon evacuated by them. So you see, even though the terrain has changed, there were trees on that ridgeline, similar to what we see today. Another soldier with the 29th USCT, a lieutenant, one of these white officers, these were black units with white officers still at that time, said this: "The firing was rapid for a short time. Our brigade advanced in magnificent line on the extreme left. Our whole army was advancing. The troops were full of enthusiasm. We had nerved ourselves for fierce work. Every man felt as if the death hour of the rebellion had come. And we were glad we were honored by being there. We moved in line of battle with orders to continue thus to advance until we should engage the enemy. As we drew nearer, the firing ceased. No more shells came howling over us." Lieutenant George Smith of the 29th USCT. If you look back the way we came, back to the west, see this battlefield from a different perspective. This was the position of General William Cox's North Carolina Brigade, about 500 men, lining what was called Trent Lane, which was a farm lane, heading to the south here. So along this road generally is where most roughly 500 Tar Heels would have been, facing west, and they're going to be sending out those skirmishers and sharpshooters that we talked about, that the USCT were engaging with as we walked across the field. Now, when the Confederate attack had started that morning, they were mostly concerned about Federals coming in from the south. So most of General John B. Gordon's 2nd Corps of Infantry, when they attacked from the village in this direction, driving the Federal cavalry down the road, most of those troops did a left wheel and ended up facing south. Only one brigade, General Cox's troops, end up facing west. You notice one gun, one cannon up here, paralleling the road. That represents where the Confederate artillery would have been. Several cannon lined up, shooting down the road at the advancing, particularly white troops in the 24th Corps. And it's kind of hard to make out from here, but where we started from was very close to that far tree line, and just across the modern highway from that was the Coleman Farm. That is where the action is the fiercest, the heaviest casualties, where the Confederate artillery is hammering units like the 11th Maine. It suffers more than 50 casualties in a matter of minutes, including their colonel, who's wounded and captured. They're engaging these Confederate sharpshooters, and some of the Confederate cavalry are still on the field off here to the far right from where you are. So they're getting all of that action. The USCT, coming across where we are, just engaged with those Confederate sharpshooters, as it turned out. Actually, excuse me, before we go any further, there is also one civilian casualty. Mentioned the Coleman Farm many times, Confederate artillery hitting that area. Well, there was an enslaved woman named Hannah Reynolds who was at the Coleman Farm. She's caught in the crossfire. She's wounded in the arm severely, probably by Confederate artillery firing right here from this area. Federal surgeons tend to her. They're unable to save her life. She dies 3 days later, a free woman. Her husband, Abram, at her side.
See General Grant. I'd rather die 1,000 deaths than do so, but I must go see Grant. That's what sets up the meeting here in the McLean House. And the reason the McLean House is picked is due, one, your happenstance, but two, more importantly, by the courtesy and generosity that General Grant shows to General Lee. And they'll talk about that when I'm done. But you'll have a chance to get a first-person recount of what happened between the two men here. But Grant tells us in his memoirs that when he got Lee's note, he'd been suffering a debilitating migraine headache. He said, "My headache was immediately cured." And he replies to General Lee, first apologizing that it's taken so long to get word back to General Lee. Grant was about 12 miles away. He'd been riding cross country all morning, some 24 miles by the time he gets here, with a migraine headache. You can imagine that. He apologizes to General Lee, tells him where he is, and invites General Lee to pick the place for the meeting, and he'll ride to meet him. Now, usually the guy that's going to surrender doesn't get to decide when and where it's going to happen. But Grant is going to follow President Lincoln's admonition let them up easy. You decide when and where we want to meet, and I will come and see you. General Lee sends his aide, Colonel Marshall, into the village. The village is kind of neutral territory. It's in between the lines. So it's a safe place to meet. Colonel Marshall rides all the way down through the old stage road looking for a place to meet, looking for someone that can direct him to a place to meet. Doesn't see any property owner. Like we said, if you could, you get out of here. You can hang around while the fighting's going on. Finally bumps into this guy, Wilmer McLean, out here on the road somewhere. They talk. Mr. McLean tries to get him to use maybe the old tavern, the old Rainy Tavern, the barn, the Clover Hill, anything but his house. Now, why was he so reluctant to have the generals use his house? Well, he had been at Manassas, First Battle of Manassas, first Bull Run. And he rented his property there to the Confederate Army to use as their headquarters. And the house was destroyed. Now, 4 years later, all right, can we use your house again? He's not real happy about it.
Well, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, General.
I wasn't expecting a responsive reading, but that was good.
April 2nd, 1865, the siege of Petersburg was broken, as I had predicted it would be. I had told President Davis, once it becomes a siege, it's only a matter of time. April 2nd, the night of the 2nd, we evacuated Petersburg and Richmond. All the roads out of Petersburg, Mutahundert, and Richmond all converge on a little place called Amelia Court House. We had pre-planned for this day. We had pre-planned for supplies and food to be at Amelia Court House. All these different roads would bring all the troops from Richmond and Petersburg together for the retreat down the Richmond-Danville rail line, which runs southwest to Danville, and from there the plan would be to join up with Joe Johnston's army in the Carolinas. With that size of an army, we thought we had a chance to defeat Sherman and then turn and deal with General Grant. Sounds like a fantastic idea, but we were going to take that chance. In any kind of military operation, especially like this, the best plans will go, once we start moving, things go wrong.
He said, General, just let them up easy. Send them home. They still got time to get in a crop in their little farms that they've got. Send them home. I bid him farewell and went to rejoin the Army. The Army of the Potomac and the Army of the James. The Army of the James went faster with Phil Sheridan and General E.O.C. Ord. They went south and got in front west of the Army of Northern Virginia. The Army of the Potomac was coming from their east side. Now, as General Lee told you, they got as far as Farmville. They fought the Battle of Five Forks and lost a major battle and many men captured and wounded. Then he got to Sailor's Creek on the 6th, lost, I'm told this early on, about a third of his army, I think 9 of his general officers, as he said, including his own son. And he had gotten almost here, he'd gotten to Farmville. Now, I must compliment General Lee in that he told you to meet the courthouse. He stopped for a day to try to get his starving troops some food. He had an 8-hour march on me, a good day, which is critical in moving an army. But General Lee, the military man, became General Lee, the humanitarian, and gave up that lead, and he knew what that could mean to try to feed his men.
The infantry's there. So I made the decision. I'm going to meet General Grant. I'd already sent him the message. I was going to meet him at 10 o'clock on the stage road, and at that time I would surrender the Army. At 1 o'clock that morning, I had changed my uniform. I'm wearing a full dress uniform. It's got the gold braid on the sleeves. First and last time I'll wear this uniform. Had the sword belt, the sash, the beautiful sword, my what I would call my dress spurs. That was at 1 o'clock in the morning, and one of my staff officers said, "Why are you dressed like that?" They also were shocked I had a white shirt. Probably the only white shirt anywhere within 50 miles. And as an old Virginia gentleman, you come prepared. I said, I have to go see General Grant. If I go see General Grant today, I will probably be his prisoner, and I want to look my best. So at 10 o'clock that morning, I had traveled back down the stage road this way to my rear guard with my staff to meet General Grant at 10 o'clock on the stage road. When we arrive at the end of my rear guard and now the Union advance guard, we come out into the open. We've got something sort of white to show that we're there for a treaty or passing messages. There's skirmishers coming towards us from the Union lines. When they see us, they stop. They send an officer up there. He very politely says, "Why are you here? What are you doing out here?" I'm sure none of these men had ever seen General Lee out at the rear guard with a flag of truce. We tell him what we want. I'm here to meet General Grant. He leaves. Another senior officer comes out. They tell me that they don't know. They give me a message that is the message that General Grant sent me, telling me he's not going to meet me. He's not going to be there at 10 o'clock. Well, now that the decision has been made to surrender my army, I want it over with. I want it done before anyone else gets killed. So I'm frustrated. Miscommunication, misunderstanding of a message or something, and now another delay. At 10 o'clock I could surrender the army and it would be done. I wad up the message and throw it at Colonel Taylor. Right there. He doesn't talk to me right now. And I called Colonel Marshall over to send another message, specifically using the word surrender. I send that back. I get a message from General Meade. Now, you remember you said that General Meade was ill, which is true. I was surprised by the message because General Meade and I were friends all the way beyond the Mexican War. He was friends not only of me, he would come to the house when he was in Washington City. And he says he's been ordered to attack and he can't stop the attack. So I sent another message back and I said, read what I'm sending to General Grant. So finally we agreed to a 1-hour truce. And Meade sends another message and says, I don't know where General Grant is. If you send that copy of that message to different points in the line, it will reach him. And so that's what we did.
Surrender. And as I read it, I remembered the night before with John Rawlins yelling at me, "That will not do." And I handed him the message and he read it and he caught his throat. He about cried. And as he was reading it, I leaned over my saddle and I said, "Colonel Rawlins, will that do?" And he said, "Yes, I suspect it will." One officer said, "3 cheers, hip hip," and it just faded away. No cheers. None of my staff was able to cheer. So I got off my horse and sat on a rock, called for pencil and paper, and I wrote a note to General Lee. And in my reply, I said a couple of things that I should like you to know. First of all, I had been told, Harry Pease told me the efforts to find me. So I know that there have been 3 armies looking for me. The Army of the Potomac, the Army of Northern Virginia, and the Army of the James. And they've been looking for me for better than 2 hours. So my reply to General Lee was, your message of 9 o'clock this morning, or 10 o'clock this morning, is just received by me at 11:50 a.m. I specifically stated the time, and I am 4 miles west of Walker's Church. I told him exactly as much as I could where I was, and that meant I'm 8 miles from here. And I said, the other thing I told him was, I will meet you at a place of your choosing. I gave him the option to choose where we met.
Thank you for watching our video. Please remember to like, share, leave a comment, and subscribe. It really helps us grow the channel. Also, if you're looking for more history-related content, then we invite you to head over to our website, americasbesthistory.com.